our 2 o'clock speaker is Janet Clements, Stormwater and Green Infrastructure. Janet is with Corona Environmental Consulting. She has more than 17 years of experience in water resources planning and economics. She received her BS in sustainable recourse. Does that mean resource management from Ohio University? Her master's degree in agriculture and natural resource economics from Colorado State. She is an expert in the field of integrated water resource management. She has worked in the area of stormwater management, green stormwater infrastructure, using the acronym GSI. Her presentation explains the triple bottom line of GSI and describes a rigorous economic framework to quantify and monetize individual benefit categories from green stormwater infrastructure through the triple bottom line analysis. GSI practices can also yield many co-benefits, including flood risk reduction, improved air quality, related health benefits, energy savings, climate resilience, enhanced community livability, and more. Janet, the program is yours.
Great. Well, thanks everyone. Oh, you're probably not looking at the right, are you looking at the right screen? There we go. Can you all see my screen?
That's the title, yeah.
Great, okay. All right, so, well, I'm happy to be here today. Happy to see I caught the presentation from Iowa and saw some green stormwater infrastructure projects, so that was great to see. I'm here today to talk about really a methodology that my colleagues and I have recently developed, a kind of tool that my colleagues and I developed for the Water Research Foundation. And it's designed to help, stormwater practitioners assess what we call the triple bottom line benefits of green stormwater infrastructure. So before I dive in, I'll just introduce the project team. Thanks, Hank, for introducing me. I was, helped on this project by my colleagues at Corona Environmental Consulting, as well as by Kennedy Jenks, who's an Alan Fleming, who's an engineer, helped us kind of on the engineering side of things. And again, this project was funded by the Water Research Foundation. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the foundation, it is a member organization made up of mostly water, wastewater, and utilities from across the country. So they do a lot of applied research to help help those utilities tackle challenging issues in the water sector. So this project and tool that I'll talk about today was really benefited from, kind of along the lines of the Water Research Foundation. It really benefited from the participation of 14 different organizations from across the country, most of which were utilities or municipalities. We also had American Rivers, a nonprofit organization, on our participating advisory board as well. But they really helped kind of provide direction for the project and also kind of beta tested our methodology and tool in later stages. Okay, so for the project itself, so what the outcome of this research is, or what the objective was to develop kind of a framework, an economic framework, as well as a kind of an associated tool in Excel to help, like I said, stormwater practitioners, quantify and monetize the various benefits of green infrastructure, what we often call triple bottom line benefits, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So being able to kind of quantify and monetize those benefits, as well as being able to compare them to costs. So before I go too far, a little bit of background on what I mean by triple bottom line analysis. This is a term that as a water resource economist, I hear in the water sector a lot. And I've done a lot of work with triple bottom line analysis. And as an economist, to me, it's really a comprehensive benefit cost analysis. So it's a benefit cost analysis that looks at the full range of benefits and costs of in this case, green infrastructure project or program, including benefits and costs across different categories, which include those triple bottom line. So financial, social, environmental benefits and costs. In thinking about performing a triple bottom line analysis, you know, you always want to think about how those benefits and costs might change over time, as well as who's bearing the costs and who's benefiting from a project or program. So the idea of triple bottom line analysis, it really has its roots kind of in the economics of sustainability. And the idea is that, you know, rather than focusing on kind of costs and revenues or simply cost effectiveness to measure, you know, one key aspect of a project like a water quality parameter, when you take a kind of broader economic perspective, you can really start to make decisions or identify alternatives that kind of maximize the value to the community that a utility or municipality might be serving. So what you're looking at now is actually a list of all the different benefits of green infrastructure that are included in the tool that I'll talk a little bit more about. So kind of along the lines of the triple bottom line, we have financial benefits in that middle bubble there. These are benefits that kind of accrue to a utility or a municipality in the form of avoided costs or cost savings, you know, because they implement green infrastructure. So it could include things like avoided gray infrastructure costs, for example. On the social side, we have benefits that kind of accrue to the broader community that the utility or municipality serves. Things like public health benefits from, you know, the cooling effect that green infrastructure can provide. Public health benefits associated with air quality improvements that green infrastructure provides. In some cases, green infrastructure also, you know, increases recreational opportunities or creates jobs for lower skilled workers. Those are also social benefits. Environmental benefits, going to the yellow bubble, are benefits that result in direct changes to the environment. So things like air quality, improved habitat, sometimes green infrastructure, wetlands, for example, can improve habitat and provide those types of benefits, reducing carbon through increased vegetation, et cetera. So why is this information important? You know, again, the objective of this project is to really try to quantify a lot of those benefits and put them in monetary terms. And I've already kind of alluded to the fact that, you know, that helps, you know, in the field of environmental economics, this, you know, that helps you identify alternatives that maximize community value. And it allows you to compare benefits more equally to cost, right? Kind of going from a apples to oranges comparison to an apples to apples comparison. I think one of the interesting things that I found at the beginning of this research is that when we met with the 14 participating organizations that I showed up on the screen earlier, you know, they said, you know, we really need this information because as engineers, we need to be able to convince our peer engineers within our utility that this is important and that green infrastructure really can yield these benefits. And we can't come to them with kind of a ranking scale on 1 to 5 of benefits. We need to show them kind of hard data. We need to speak their language. And I thought that was really interesting. There's also a lot of other ways to, you know, that this information is important. You know, it can allow utilities and municipalities to compete for funding for green infrastructure projects. It can, I'll talk a little bit more about this, but it can leverage private capital and alternative funding sources based on co-benefits, right? And it can also support alternative project delivery models. And that can include a range of things, including incentives for private property owners to adopt green infrastructure. This information can also be important just as a, you know, as a way to gain stakeholder support and community buy-in. So a little bit about the project, the tool itself. It is an Excel-based tool. You don't have to have a PhD in economics to use it. It comes with kind of step-by-step guidance that, you know, that's actually what you're seeing here on the screen on the right-hand side is kind of step-by-step guidance that leads you through what we call kind of a module for each benefit, and I'll touch on that in a bit. We also developed a kind of comprehensive report that kind of outlines the economic framework upon which the tool is based. And we also developed, I think this is a valuable part of the project, is that we also kind of developed a series of technical appendices, one for each of the benefits included in the tool, that really document kind of the state of quantifying that benefit, different factors that affect whether that benefit's applicable in a given situation, and things that might affect the provision of that benefit. And I think that's really important in helping utilities and municipalities think about how they actually achieve these different benefits through green infrastructure design and implementation. We also applied the tool to 4 different case study applications. So this is on the right-hand side of your screen there, you're seeing the actual economic framework upon which the tool is based, kind of starting with developing a GSI scenario, thinking about your baseline scenario. So, if we don't have a green infrastructure project or program, what would we do? And that can kind of help you, that it kind of informs later parts of your analysis and thinking about what the benefits of such a program might be. And then it kind of leads you through identifying the range of benefits that apply to your scenario or project, and then ways to quantify the associated benefits and monetize those benefits as well. The tool is really based on, we didn't want to recreate the wheel. It's based on a lot of extensive research that has been done by others as well as ourselves. It applies kind of standard economic valuation methods, and those are very well documented in the kind of technical appendices I talked about. We really tried to make the tool accessible to people. So we wanted to be able to provide enough data in the tool, default values that vary by kind of region or city, depending on, or state, depending on the benefit that you're looking at. So we didn't want, the user to have to come to the tool with truckloads of information to be able to use it. At the same time, we wanted those more kind of advanced users to be able to customize it. So we do kind of try to strike that balance in the tool. The tool is applicable. It can be kind of applied at various scales. So from a large project site to the neighborhood scale to city scale to up to kind of the watershed scale. And I talked a little bit already about how we were really careful in really guiding people through when a certain benefit might apply, when it may not, and really factors that affect, whether or not that benefit is applicable. So this is a snapshot of the tool. So this is kind of the first thing someone would do if they entered the tool. They would enter some key information about their study area. And then they would also, what you see kind of, there's 2 kind of snapshots here. This is one Excel tab. You enter some basic information about your study area. You enter some, the second one down here, you enter some information on the types of green infrastructure that you want to analyze, as well as either the kind of impervious acres managed or by those different types, or the number of VMPs. And what you see in the this main snapshot here of the input page is that these cells highlighted in green are really where the user needs to input information. The rest of these gray cells are calculations. And again, they calculate things associated, if you put in, this one is these are kind of made up numbers, but if you put in, 57 acres of green roofs, the tool then calculates, well, that translates to how much volume you're managing and the annual runoff that you're managing in terms of stormwater. So again, a utility or user could come in and overwrite those calculations to make it more applicable to them. After you enter kind of your green infrastructure scenario information, there's also a cost module. And again, this is going to be important in thinking about comparing benefits and costs over time. So what you're seeing here is just a snapshot of a part of the cost module. A user can go in and enter, if they know cost information and the timeline over which they're going to use the, implement this green infrastructure, they can go in and enter that. There's also default values in the tool that vary by green infrastructure practice type. So the user can rely on that as well. So the next part of the tool is really kind of, the rest of the tool, I guess I should say, is really organized as a series of modules. And so each, if you can kind of see down here, you can see these tabs in the Excel. Each benefit has its own module. And really each module walks the user through kind of what I like to think of as an algorithm. So one of the first benefit modules in the tool is avoided infrastructure costs. So if your baseline scenario is, say, a gray infrastructure, you're going to compare green infrastructure to gray infrastructure. You can go in and say, okay, you know what? I know the cost of what the alternative would be, and I'm going to go in and enter that in my tool. So this is there's like a manual option, and then if you don't know that, the tool walks you through kind of a series of calculators. You can say, you know, I'm in a combined sewer community, so if I implement this green infrastructure scenario, I can reduce my combined sewer overflow reduction project by X amount, my tunnel, you know, by X amount, or I can reduce my sewer separation project by X amount, and the tool can walk you through that. There's also costs in there that are more widely applicable to, you know, MS4 communities that aren't necessarily in a combined sewer area. This is an example of a relatively straightforward benefit module. It starts to, this is one for energy savings. So energy savings with green infrastructure, there's different ways that green infrastructure can result in energy savings. If you're looking at trees and green roofs as part of your green infrastructure scenario, that can result in energy savings for buildings if the trees are planted near buildings in a certain location. If you're in a combined sewer community, you can have energy savings associated with green infrastructure by removing stormwater from the combined sewer system. So you're no longer pumping and treating that stormwater because you're capturing it through green infrastructure, and that results in energy savings. And then if you have rainwater harvesting techniques like cisterns or rain barrels included in your green infrastructure scenario, you can also get energy savings through those potable water supply offsets. You're no longer, the municipality is no longer treating and distributing that water. So energy savings there as well. This is a pretty well-researched area. The Forest Service and researchers at different universities have really developed extensive modeling and research on building energy savings associated with trees and green roofs, for example. And we were able to incorporate that research into the tool. There's other kind of the other two components of energy savings have also been pretty well researched, and there's some standard methods for estimating those energy savings. What you can see here, this green roof energy calculator data this is a kind of a national tool developed by a researcher at the University of Arizona. And he was generous enough to allow us to incorporate the data from his tool into our tool. And again, his tool looks at energy savings from green roofs, and the user can go in and enter different variables that affect those energy savings. So you enter kind of a city, if your city's not in there, you can enter a city, pick from a list of 100 that's similar to you in climate. You enter some basic information on the average kind of characteristics of green roofs. So if you're looking at kind of a soil depth, that affects energy savings. You can enter those different variables, and it will give you the energy savings associated with those types of green roofs. So again, that's an example of a benefit that's relatively straightforward to calculate. But a lot of the benefits in the tools, as you could see from that list, that initial list I showed you of the different bubbles, a lot of the benefits in the tool are not so straightforward to calculate. One of these is what I have up here is increased property values. So we know that there's lots of studies that have shown that the green infrastructure, well-designed and maintained green infrastructure, can result in increased sale prices for homes, as well as increased rental rates at office buildings and in multifamily buildings. Now, the way that economists typically kind of measure that is what's called hedonic pricing. And really, that's just kind of a fancy term for building a big regression model to compare buildings with different characteristics, some with green infrastructure and some without, and kind of isolating, using kind of economic techniques to kind of isolate the difference in sales price that can be attributed to green infrastructure. Our approach, unfortunately, we didn't have the scope or time to do that type of study. I would have loved to. But instead of being able to do that, we relied on kind of existing studies to examine what others have found in terms of how does green infrastructure affect property values. And what we found is, there are quite a few studies on the effect of green infrastructure or similar kind of landscaping techniques on single-family residential property values. Some studies show estimates as high as, well-designed landscaping and green infrastructure can increase residential property values by up to 11%. And that really depends on kind of the scale and the type of improvement. Most estimates from the literature show a range from about 1% to 5%. And again, that's going to vary by not just scale and type of project, but the type of green infrastructure practice. So trees and green roofs, for example, show a much higher value compared to some other green infrastructure types. There's less work, I think, conducted on the effect on kind of multifamily or commercial properties, but the trends are very similar, and the estimates in terms of percentage increase are similar, and there's kind of positive impacts of green infrastructure. So if you think about it, should be a pretty basic math problem, right? What you're seeing here is kind of the steps that it would take to kind of estimate these values. So if you think about, okay, I can think about the baseline property value for single family residential, for example, in my study area. Then I can determine the percentage of properties that are impacted by green infrastructure improvements, different types of green infrastructure improvements. And then I can apply that percentage increase or a range of increases for different green infrastructure practice types to that property, the value of those properties. Sounds pretty simple, but there's a lot of factors that are going to affect, whether this benefit applies and how it applies and what the level of benefit is. So, it can be difficult depending on the scale of improvement. Some studies have shown that, it's not just the property that the green infrastructure is located next to, but, if you're doing a large scale Green Street program, for example, property values, there's property value kind of impacts associated with properties located a bit further away. It also depends, if you're implementing green infrastructure in an area that's already highly vegetated or already has very high property values, you're probably not going to see much of an increase. There's also studies have shown that there's much larger percentage increases in lower income areas. And that's often because they've, not been, they're underinvested in historically and often don't have as much vegetation kind of as a baseline anyway. And then that really, I'm sure some of you are already thinking of this, that really starts to kind of spur thoughts about equity. Are there any unintended consequences associated with implementing these large scale improvements in certain areas? They should be, designed within to match the characteristics of the community, right? And there's a lot of kind of conversations in the stormwater world going on about equity issues right now. Of course, it's going to depend on how you design the green infrastructure, and it has to be well maintained, right? You can't create an eyesore by not maintaining with a bunch of weeds. That's probably going to decrease your property values. And then finally, with property values, they really, the value that green infrastructure can provide to a property really reflects all of the benefits that it provides. So if you're willing to pay more for a home because it has green infrastructure, it may be because it provides cooling, or it increases air quality, or if the green infrastructure project provides recreational opportunities to nearby properties. Those are all things that are kind of reflected in these property value increases. So you can't kind of go add up, the recreational benefits associated with green infrastructure to the property value benefits, or you'd be double counting. So just in the tool, we really try to account for all these things, and we guide the user through how to do that. Now it's difficult, but this particular benefit does require quite a bit of user judgment and thought about the true benefit. This is an example of the results dashboard of the tool. What you can see here is that the tool does give you quite a bit of information after you kind of go through all the benefit categories. You can look at differences in benefits and costs over time. So you can enter your analysis period. Again, these are kind of made up numbers, but this one has a 28-year period, 28-year analysis period and a discount rate of 4%. It shows you kind of over time your total benefits and costs, and then as well as your kind of annualized values. If you were to scroll to the right in this particular results dashboard, you would see kind of quantitative estimates of the benefits that apply to your green infrastructure scenario. So things like green jobs created or tons of carbon reduced, energy savings, etc. If you were to scroll down, it would show you kind of detailed information on the costs and benefits in each year of your analysis period. And so there's lots of different ways to kind of slice and dice this information. The tool has, as I mentioned, we did several different case studies of the tool, or included several different case studies in the tool. We tried to get a good geographic range, although it was a little bit difficult just in being able to get the right data that we needed just from, we kind of did this right at the start. We were doing this right at the start of COVID, so it was a little bit hard to get utilities' attention, but I think we did a pretty good job of getting a range of geographic areas and a range of different types of green infrastructure projects. So we did a case study in St. Paul, Minnesota, for example, looking at we actually ran the tool twice. We compared kind of a hybrid green-gray alternative to a more green alternative of a redevelopment project in St. Paul on a 134-acre site. And this particular project had a lot of recreational benefits associated with it, as well as benefits associated with heat stress reduction. There was a lot of vegetation being introduced in a large-scale kind of stream restoration project. We were able, as part of this, I think one of the interesting things about the case studies as well is that where we tried to compare them to the results of studies using different tools, just to kind of point out differences and kind of examining what our tool does compared to others. And in this particular case, we compared it to a tool that's a proprietary tool called AutoCase, and we kind of compared the results of the two analyses. We also looked at a citywide, so going from a 134-acre site to kind of a citywide stormwater management plan for Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And we were able to compare the results of our tool to a study that American Rivers and the Center for Neighborhood Technology led. They developed kind of a guidebook for benefits of green infrastructure about 10 years ago. And so comparing, how things have evolved since then. Their tool was a great tool, but, some of the benefits of, valuation methods have evolved since then. I'll talk a little bit about the Seattle, Washington case study here. And then we also did which was a neighborhood improvement. And then we also did a case study in Cleveland looking at the benefits of their green infrastructure projects that were funded throughout the city of Cleveland through their green infrastructure grant program. So looking at projects on private property and kind of showing the value to them that they're getting from that grant program. So this is an example of Seattle Public Utilities Longfellow Creek projects. It is one of the case studies that we did. It was a neighborhood scale project. So if you look at on the right-hand side of your screen here, this is kind of this is Longfellow Creek in the blue, and these orange things are where these orange kind of lines here are where the green infrastructure projects are going to be implemented. So it's kind of a neighborhood scale project and a really kind of highly valuable creek that's a salmon bearing stream. And what Seattle Public Utilities does an amazing job in, I think, in really conducting outreach to the communities where they're putting green infrastructure and making sure that they're meeting kind of established objectives. So they have included ways to kind of, and I'll talk about this a little bit more, measure or make sure they're meeting kind of equity goals and other goals, public health goals, and transportation / kind of mobility goals. So this project included a lot of, this long strip here was kind of Green Street project that included kind of a lot of pedestrian and kind of mobility upgrades. This one in the middle here included the kind of revamping of a I guess what I would call a pocket park that kind of connected two different neighborhoods, and it had been overgrown and was kind of an eyesore, to be honest. If you can look at, I looked at before pictures, and they, when they were doing outreach to the community at the beginning of the project, they identified a need to kind of upgrade that park. And I think one of the really cool things about this example is that they were able, based on those co-benefits, so providing kind of more mobility and pedestrian improvements, as well as the park, they were able to partner with their Department of Transportation and leverage additional funding for art installations in the park. So I think it's a really great example of leveraging these different benefits for funding green infrastructure projects. What you can see on the left-hand side is the results of this particular case study. And you can see, not all benefits applied in Seattle, but some did. And you can see that water quality was the highest value, but recreation was also very high, as well as property value improvements. This is an example of the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District case study that we did of their Green Infrastructure Grant Program. And this kind of leads a little bit of a segue to thinking a little bit about private property incentives. So if you remember in the beginning talking about how I think benefits, co-benefits information can help to support different project delivery models. And a lot of utilities have been moving towards increasing the amount of green infrastructure that they try to implement on private property. And I'll talk a little bit about why, but one example of this is Northeast Ohio. So we did a kind of an examination of the 9 projects that they funded on private property in 2020. It cost about $2 million. And they had already looked at the kind of cost effectiveness of these projects in terms of managing stormwater. And for the district, the sewer district, they get kind of a good bang for their buck in implementing these projects compared to implementing projects in the public right of way. And they also, what our analysis showed is that they also get a lot of benefit. They get a lot of benefit. Most of these projects that were on, this one's a retrofit project, but many of them were also on redevelopment sites that, so the baseline was kind of implementing traditional stormwater management infrastructure, or, they're in a combined sewer community and they're implementing kind of a large scale CSO project. So looking at, how does this help protect that investment? So a lot of avoided infrastructure costs in this one, as well as property value benefits. But overall, the benefit cost ratio was high. We didn't look at water quality in this one because we looked at avoided infrastructure costs. We didn't want to kind of double count there, because both the alternatives would provide that benefit. So that's kind of an example of, the Northeast Ohio's kind of program. But I think it's really interesting. I did a study a few years ago with some of my colleagues on looking at these different types of incentive programs throughout the country, grant programs, rebate programs, kind of looking at lessons learned of different utilities. And one thing that a lot of them found is that in addition to benefits, it's really cost effective. So what you see here is an example of the cost effectiveness or a cost effectiveness kind of analysis that the city of Portland did. And they kind of decided, what, they really wanted to expand the implementation of green infrastructure on private property. And they got a little bit of pushback from internally from people within the city. And so they conducted a kind of life cycle evaluation of the costs of implementing green infrastructure in the public right of way compared to doing it on private property. And they found there's a lot of numbers here, but just if you look at this, what's circled in red, you can see a stormwater planter in the public right of way costs about $467 per cubic foot over the life cycle, compared to on private property, $162 per acre foot. So they're seeing significant savings, and that really helped them justify to go in, and they actually do it directly. They kind of go in, recruit property owners at a neighborhood scale, and implement green infrastructure kind of at the neighborhood level. other utilities have found similar cost savings associated with this. So Louisville, Kentucky, every time they funded a project on private property through their grant program, they would rerun their hydrologic modeling to look at what the impact of was, how they could downscale their drain infrastructure accordingly to save money. So very cost effective. And then other programs include, other successful programs include Philadelphia, Montgomery County, Washington, D.C. They all have grant and rebate programs, and they've also found kind of significant savings. I think the interesting thing about it too is that, you know, in thinking about private property incentives, one of the things, what you see on the right-hand side of the screen is that report I mentioned that my colleagues and I did. Again, this is a Water Research Foundation project, but looking at how people sell or recruit property owners. And one of the lessons learned from that program was that, you know, people don't really care about stormwater all that much, especially if you're thinking about a homeowner. They don't think about stormwater probably as much as most of us here might, or, you know, utilities or stormwater professionals. But when you demonstrate the benefits of a green infrastructure project, for example, on property values, that really kind of gets their interest. So in this case, this is a representative from someone in Kansas saying, you know, they really found success in selling their program that way. And then just another kind of last word on benefits here is that a number of years ago, I was involved in a project with the Natural Resource Defense Council looking at, or we did some workshops with developers to think about, or to better understand, I guess, what would incentivize them to adopt green infrastructure as part of their new development, redevelopment sites, you know, when they're redeveloping or a property. And one of the things that they said is, you know, if it increases our bottom line, and you can show us this through kind of case studies and peer testimonials based on actual projects, we'll adopt it. You have to kind of get the word out, but you know, we're a competitive industry, and we will adopt things that are going to increase our bottom line and you know, potentially increase rental rates, etc. They did want to kind of see actual data on projects and to be able to kind of calculate or estimate those benefits for them. So the tool that I presented was more focused kind of from a utility public perspective, but I think there is some work to do in kind of demonstrating the benefits for private property owners as well. And I think I have about 2 minutes left, so I'm on my last slide. I just a note on kind of you know, what we identified in doing this research as kind of the key research gaps and next steps. In terms of just kind of quantifying and monetizing benefits, you know, there's, I think, more work to do related to how green infrastructure can reduce flood risk, how it can create better habitat